Joan Hogan is my name. My area of expertise, I would say, is nutrition and neurological conditions. For the last 15 years, I'd say I've worked mainly with migraine, dystonia, and Parkinson's. So those are my key areas. I tend to use a lot of different tools that are kind of unique in nutrition. I use food sensitivity testing, genetic testing, and other markers to help determine what kind of plan I make for each person. Well, I first started because I had a whole other career before I got into neurological conditions. I actually used to work with kidney disease and dialysis patients, and I kind of switched gears after 30 years, and I got interested in migraines and started with migraines because migraines are a brain disorder, and I felt as though there needed to be a nutrition component. And that's when I started to work with food sensitivity. And it was at that point that I became so aware of areas that were not being addressed with traditional nutrition. We talk about eat your fruits, your vegetables, eat balanced diet, all that, which all of that can be very important. But it tied in these other components to our food that I don't think people are very aware of, that can activate pain, activate all sorts of neurochemicals that activate migraine. I then found in our practice, because we also deal with dystonia, that patients that had migraines and dystonia were beginning to see me and said, I want to know more about what you do. And so I was starting to work more with those disorders, and I saw more of this connection between the brain, pain, and their condition, and foods, and areas of foods I don't always think are being addressed with people. And so I think that's what adds to my expertise. In the last 10 years, I've added in a genetic component. I've been using that a lot more with migraine too, as looking at people's genetics and identifying genes that may be able to be, we're all kind of predisposed, let's say, to heart disease or that kind of thing, and that I could find out some of these genes. As we know, dopamine is very important in dystonia, and I'd find genes may be related to poor dopamine metabolism, and I could work with nutrients to better support those pathways. So I would say those are my unique areas of expertise, is kind of looking at these unique areas that aren't always addressed. Yeah, and some of them I'll be talking about tomorrow. Of course, we're learning a lot more about this gut-brain connection, and I really, because I also find a number of my patients have gut disorders, and I often start with the gut and correcting that problem, and I can do that with food sensitivity testing, just basic guidelines, which of course I'm going to have a room full of people that don't have food sensitivity testing, and so I can still give a lot of guidelines. So I find some of the additives in our food can really cause havoc with people. Finding out their diet and to better correct their microbiome with that brain-gut connection. I think that's important. I think fatty acids, I'm finding out, are very important. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about fats and what fats are important and what should we be focusing on. Are they bad? Are they good? So those are some of the more unique areas that I think that dystonia patients can benefit from, even without testing or that kind of thing. Well, I like to break things down, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, is I like to break down change with tiers. I call it tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And tier 1 is I really work with getting people back to the basics of finding ways to become more plant-based in their eating. They don't need to become vegetarians necessarily, but to have more of a plant-based eating and finding out ways to eliminate additives, which we often find in our processed and ultra-processed foods. A lot of people get benefit there. I see some people really benefiting with dystonia, just cutting out a refined sugar diet. I have found more than once that people with dystonia don't do well with a lot of sugar. They say it always makes their symptoms worse. And so I tend to start with those things to begin with. Yeah, and that's how I'd start. Again, probably those same areas. I might amp it up a little bit because I often find people with dystonia are well educated and they've done a lot of their own homework on lifestyle. And so I find when I speak to a group with dystonia, it amps up the things that I want to address. So I might want to focus a little more on the type of fats they eat. At that point, with some people, I do consider maybe we do want to go an extra step or two, do some genetic testing, do some food sensitivity testing. We might look at, we're finding out so much about probiotics. I find a lot of times with dystonia, people are anxious. That tends to be a component. And so I might work on diets that are more calming, foods that are more calming, maybe even consider a probiotic or an adaptogen to add to their whole diet program. But those are some of the things I'd look at a little deeper. Maybe even nutrient testing, I do that to make sure they're getting all these intricate nutrients that they need and they're not overdoing on some. Sometimes you can overdo on supplements as well, or the wrong kinds. In our clinic, they've been seeing Dr. Hogan for years, and all of a sudden, they just decide, I'm tired of this. I want to look at diet. And so I kind of just start where each person's at. You know, what have they tried? What if they haven't tried? Sometimes depending on what their history is, I might consider, let's try gluten-free for a while. Let's try to cut out these certain foods. No, there is never a bad time to start. Like I say, I can count many people that have had symptoms for a while. And sometimes it's because maybe Botox by itself isn't giving them all the answers. Sometimes they know on a gut level, it's something I'm eating. And that's when I sometimes will just get into them cleaning up the food. People don't think things about citric acid in our food, lecithin, polysorbates, benzoic acid. These are all additives that people just, they can have a label of natural, and they're still in those foods. And so I have them start to unpack their food a little differently, which is what I hope to accomplish tomorrow, is just having people unpack their diet just a little differently, that they might be able to create some change. That's the beauty of nutrition. You can start making changes at 90 or 20, and I think there's always room to change. And so in our clinic, Dr. Hogan's been seeing patients with dystonia for years, and they just walk by my office. I don't exist. And then one day, I exist. And they show up on my schedule. And they say, yeah, I've been seeing Dr. Hogan for 10 years. I want to look for some changes I can make in my diet. And a lot of them are super surprised at what kind of changes they can make and make a difference. So to answer your question, no, there's no good time or bad time. That's the beauty with food. There's so many ways to address it. My problem is narrowing it into what I think that person needs.